Welcome to Cultivate, a Veritas Academy podcast, where we explore truth, beauty, and goodness through meaningful conversation. We invite you to join us in discussions meant to edify your mind, encourage your heart, and equip your family to live abundantly in Christ.
Welcome back to Cultivate. I'm Ty Fisher, the head of school here at Veritas Academy. I'm your host, and I am here with a few of my favorite people. I'm here with Bruce Etter, who is the Dean of Humane Letters here at Veritas Academy, and Graham Dennis, the Dean of Students. Both have been teachers at Veritas for a long time. Bruce has been a teacher at Veritas twice, so that's a special thing. And
I'm kind of like the Grover Cleveland of, right?
Well, you said the Grover Cleveland, not the Donald Trump. So I don't know if that's revealing about your political opinions or what. But we're here today, and I think the spirit of another person is here with us, and that is our dearly departed friend, Dr. Gregg Strawbridge. And we're here to talk about one of the things that we do at Veritas Academy called the Strawbridge Discussion Series. And that series is something that might catch you off guard because it's not something that every school does. And we're going to talk today about what we do, why we do it, and what fruit we're looking for out of it. But before we start, Graham is an elder at All Saints Church, which is a wonderful church here in Lancaster County. And Dr. Strawbridge was pastor of that church. So, Graham, if you could just give us some background information on the guy this is named after.
Yeah. So one of the things about Gregg that was really interesting is his desire coming from Mississippi and having lived in rural Mississippi and then having sort of, I don't know the best way to put this, educated himself out of the South.
Oh, Graham.
Sorry, Bruce.
To all my Southern friends,
I'm
please.
still working on it.
Please forgive me. Yeah. Please forgive Graham.
Sorry.
He's the dean of students, not the dean of Southernness. I don't know. Oh.
So yeah, that's probably not the best way to put it. But Gregg absolutely loved dialogue, debate. One of the first debates that I remember is a guy from the Church of Christ. There was a debate in one of our churches about the nature of baptism, and Gregg was so sincere, handled himself so well, and sort of was a model for us how to engage people with whom you disagree. And I think I probably handled myself worse than he did because I wanted to be an attack dog, but it was just wonderful to see his graciousness. But I just call it conversational apologetics, that was one of his goals, was to teach not only his congregants, but when he had opportunities to teach as well, how to engage in what you might call conversational apologetics.
Yeah, Graham, that's such a good word. And we all have such wonderful memories of Gregg. He passed away a few years ago. It was just a shock and a blow to our community. And as we were, I don't remember when this came up, but we were sitting around one day thinking about this thing that we wanted to do. And it just seemed, because of that characteristic of Gregg, that he was so engaging and so winsome, but not afraid to talk about things where there were really disagreements. So I remember once I was in a meeting with Gregg, and he described my view of church government as he called it the flat 2-office view, which he contrasted with his robust 3-office view.
That's funny.
And I shot back at him, but he was always so playful in conversation. So Bruce, why don't you help everyone to understand what is this discussion series that we have?
Yeah, sure. And so as I talked with Graham and you, Ty, over the years, we've tried to identify some weaknesses that we see in our students. And as they go to school, we have these alumni come back and we hear what they're saying. Mm-hmm. Hey, Mr. Etter, I encountered this, I encountered that at the university, in the workplace, whatever the case may be. And we realized that there was one sense in which we weren't preparing them maybe as well as we could have. So the point is I think that we expose our students to just about every imaginable worldview here at Veritas Academy. We really do.
Even some that don't exist.
we make up a few. Graham makes up worldviews and then plays devil's advocate with his students, the man in the basement, whatever. So, but what we realized was when students go to the university, their roommate actually holds that view.
Yeah.
This is not Mr. Dennis, kind, gracious, loving dean of students, Mr. Dennis, who's pretending. This is their roommate who really believes it, practices it, and that's a different level of engagement. So we want to bring in folks who hold to worldviews that are not necessarily consistent with what we believe here at Veritas Academy, so that our students can not only hear exactly what those folks say, what they do, how they live it out, but the other big issue is modeling for our students. Here's how you do the dialogue with someone, like that.
Yeah, so Graham and Bruce, would you give us some examples of some things that we've done? I think, Bruce, you might even have, I see papers, you might even have a list. So talk to people about what are some of the ways, and then maybe some of the people that we've had in are going to have in. And then, Graham, if you could just flesh out, so what does that look like when they're in?
Sure, yeah. First of all, we are Veritas Academy, which means
We are the Veritas Academy. We're the first one.
We are the first one.
Stop it, Graham.
Which means we have to have a liturgy.
Oh, absolutely.
So when we have a Strawbridge Series event, we have a liturgy. And a part of that liturgy, I'm going to back up if you don't mind.
Oh, that sounds great. I love liturgy.
I know we all do. We have a liturgy, and part of that liturgy.
It's not that we're OCD or anything.
No,
like
not at all. But it just makes it feel more like, oh, that took.
Yeah.
That counts now.
Yes.
Because it's liturgical. But we have something that we read at the beginning of each event. And if you don't mind, I thought it would
please.
honor the late Dr. Gregg Strawbridge by reading it. The Strawbridge series is named after the late Dr. Gregg Strawbridge. Dr. Strawbridge served as a caring pastor, astute theologian, and effective apologist throughout his many years of ministry. We honor Dr. Strawbridge by naming the series after him as we seek to emulate both his theological and philosophical insight and the gracious manner in which he engaged those who disagree with him. And then before I lay out some of the topics, we read our mission statement as a part of our liturgy. The mission of the Strawbridge series is to expose students to worldview perspectives in direct opposition to those embraced by Veritas Academy. Our goal is to do so in a unique and authentic manner, allowing individuals who hold to such views to come and speak at the school. Students will not only learn about these perspectives, but also witness a gracious manner of public discourse.
Yeah.
So that's part of our liturgy. So we started the Strawbridge series in the spring of 2022. So we're almost 2 years in. So sure, I'll list a few of the questions that we've tackled.
Sure.
Is everybody sitting down? Do you have your seatbelts on?
Please, okay.
Buckle in.
Right, okay.
Because we're not going for the easy stuff.
No, we're not.
Does the first one we did right out of the gate, does the Bible support an open and affirming position
On, like, homosexuality and
Yes.
those kind of things.
That's right. That was our very first one.
Yay!
We didn't really ease into it.
let's just start at this, like, the most trickiest thing.
And honestly, that it was a wonderful event. It was 2 hours long, and anyway.
We'll go back to that one.
Okay.
Because, Graham, if you could, that's one, and that was not, it was tricky in a sense, like, of the kind of cancel culture politics that goes on today. Might not have been the trickiest one, like, biblically.
Right.
But I'd like you to just unpack that one a little bit when we get around to it. But go ahead.
But I will say this, though. The individual that spoke was an ordained minister who, claims the Christian faith. So this is not someone who was arguing from that other perspective.
Sure.
So I think that's a unique perspective we need to expose our students to. The next two events involved the race issue. Race relations in America was May of 2022. And then in the fall of that same year, how should past racial injustice affect our view of America? That was
nobody talks about that in college, do they?
Not at all. Not at all. We had the guy who heads up the United Way down in the city, Kevin Ressler, spoke at that one. Then in December of that year, should we use alternative pronouns of someone if they request it?
Okay. Oh, I remember that. I remember that discussion.
You were involved in that one. And then there are two others we've done. We had one entire session on deconstruction.
Okay.
Having to do with folks who were walking away from the faith. And everyone seems to feel like they have to do that publicly now. Mm-hmm. So we talked. And then finally,
everyone brushes their teeth publicly now.
Right. Well, there's TikTok.
Yeah, I know.
And then finally, the one that we and we actually have one coming up in about a week, but the last one we did was the gender revolution theology of the body and the Christian response.
Yeah, and we had a professor from Lancaster Theological Seminary down who was making an argument that for kind of gender fluidity.
Right.
Yeah. Well, Graham, let's go back just and pick one of those and just give folks a sense of what it's like for students. Like, are there kindergartners there at these things? but give the folks a sense of what happens and how it happens in these meetings.
Yeah, so we have a smaller section of our high school. If you think of how our secondary school is divided up, our high school, of course, is 9th through 12th. And then we have the so-called Rhetoric stage, which is 10th through 12th. And what we decided to do is just have 11th and 12th grade students in that seminar. And then also address the same issue with 10th grade students, but actually not have them be in the seminar. And of course, in a way, it builds also a desire and anticipation that, they're going to get to graduate to that, so to speak. But the thing that I like the most, and this might not seem very important, but if you remember the famous apologetics verse in 1 Peter 3, there's a tagline at the very end, and do so with gentleness and respect. And so Bruce starts off asking personal questions. Bruce is the interviewer and starts off, we just get to know this person. And the manners piece, I think, is really important because you can imagine someone coming into a school like ours, knowing who we are, and immediately having a guard up. And, I think the way that our culture does this is such a bad model. Our culture is not modeling, engaging someone with whom you disagree with gentleness and respect. So Bruce starts off interviewing. Then we have the opportunity. Bruce asks the hard questions. The person has the opportunity to basically present his or her position on those things. Bruce doesn't really at that point engage, in a really rigorous way. We just try to understand the person's position. And then we have an opportunity for the students to engage and ask questions. And that's probably the most important time, because what we're going to do afterwards is go back later, discuss, and the students are always interested in furthering certain parts of the conversation that was generated sometimes from Bruce's questions, but often just by the interaction and the dialogue between the person who's speaking and a question that was asked from a student.
Yeah. So what restrictions do we put on these speakers? Any?
Well, let me say this. When I'm inviting speakers, I communicate very clearly to them. We're not bringing you here to beat you up. We want to hear what you have to say, and you're going to leave saying, "Wow, that was a very pleasant experience."
And have our speakers left?
every single one of them.
Yeah.
Well, the ones that we let out.
But we still have a few of them trapped in the back room.
Basement time.
I've wondered about those sounds, and now I know.
We got to do what we got to do.
Well, so, and I remember many years ago, so pre-Obergefell, we had Gil Smart, who was the kind of liberal columnist for the Lancaster paper, come in and make an argument in favor of gay marriage. And, I got to know him through this. So this was pre-Strawbridge Discussion Series. But, and as I got to know him, I said, Gil, what do you, like, he was worried, he was kind of concerned about coming here because of that reason. Like, am I going to be treated well? And I said, why would you ever think that you weren't going to be treated well? And he said, well, every time I leave the office for the weekend, there's this one Christian that calls me and he lectures me on my answering machine until it runs out of time. And so no one can leave a message for me over the weekend. I said, well, how often does that happen? He was like, every week. It happens every week. And I'm like, well, no wonder you might think Christians are jerks.
Right.
But we'll go back to maybe some of our favorite moments. But I had a favorite moment from that time with Gil. But that's so important. Mm. It's so important to practice what we preach. Mm. If we do preach that this person's made in the image of God, then even if we disagree with them, we should be able to listen to them. That doesn't mean we can't ask hard questions, though. And it doesn't mean that they can't ask hard questions, too. So what are we after in this? Why do this? At the end of this, I know from being in the discussions of starting this up that it's not a non-risk, it's a risky proposition. When you're writing that note to parents to let them know what's happening, because you don't, and you both are fathers here at the school, and we know not to trust everything that our students say when they come home. But we were going to be doing things that actually would not sound right if a student came home with this. So we're always communicating with parents. But what's the payoff? If you're going to take this risk, what's the reward that we're looking for out here? Mm.
Well, I'll jump in on that. So, the age-old question here, and it's fair. It's a good question. I've had it myself as a parent. Why in the world at a Christian school would you bring in folks that have worldviews that are the reason we're not at other institutions? Well, wait a second. It was a bait and switch.
Right.
So my response, it's a fair question, though. It really is. My response to that is, well, here's the deal. You have two options. Either we can shield them from those worldviews, and then they will be inundated with them at some point in their life and won't really have any context or model to fall back on to know how to deal with it. Or we can bring them in here in a safer environment under the umbrella of our warm, cozy, classical Christian, worldview setting and deal with it in that manner. So it's not a matter of not dealing with it. It's just when and where and how.
Yeah, I would add too that if you lived 100 years ago, these would be odd questions.
They would be.
Why would you be asking? It seemed like you were cherry picking. Like, why this one rather than that one? What is it about this question that's so important? If you think of the New Testament, Jesus is asked questions, and the gospel writers probably have said these are some of the most important ones that he was asked. Like, should we pay taxes to Caesar or not? Well, that's not just a random question. That was a massively important question for any Jew living in the first century. And so we know our students, if they're going to be part of their culture, these are questions that they're going to be confronted with.
Yeah.
And so part of the payoff is to give them, Lancaster County is not, in some respects, thankfully, not necessarily representative of our country. Mm-hmm. We're fortunate in a way. We're more like the Shire, than we are like Mordor. But it's funny, in the so-called Shire, all of my children, when they've gone to work, have found that the majority of their employees are not churched.
Yeah.
And so, and even for the ones that have been to church, really haven't been catechized. So our students are going to face certain questions, and we want them to know that you're not going to live in the Shire for the rest of your life. And God, Augustine's example in the city of God is, we're the good leaven. He cast us amongst the nations to disciple the nations and to be the good leaven. And hopefully the good result from this is them seeing this is what life is going to be like for a person living in the 21st century. And it's especially what life is going to be like for your children.
Yeah. I think that the need for this really came home to me. And I think this was sometime during COVID that, COVID time here at Veritas, as it was for other schools, was a crazy time. So I think I might have been teaching in a tent in the courtyard, this class. But I remember it was some issue, and I think it was, something that would have to do with gender and sexuality, that the book that we were reading brought up a topic. And I, as an omnibus teacher, I started into that topic, and like nothing happened. And I was like, like you would think that this would be a meaningful topic for students to discuss. I mean, and afterward, I kind of pulled one of the students aside and I said, hey, why did that just fall? Why? I expected people to jump in on that. And the student was like, oh, we all know that that's wrong and it's just dumb. And I'm like, what you think is this is stupid and no one could have a good reason for supporting this point of view. And if you think that, then when your college roommate holds that opinion and you see that they're a person made in the image of God and they might even be a nice person, that you're not going to be prepared at all. Mm-hmm. If what you think is the ideas that are not consistent with the Bible are always going to be held by kind of smelly old men who hide out behind, who live under a bridge. Sorry, there's some sniffing going on in the room. But that was I'm like, oh my. Because if you're listening to this and your child is at a classical Christian school or a Christian school that doesn't do something like this, or if you're in a homeschool environment, there are many good reasons to protect children, right? I mean, we do a lot here to protect children, and like in the grammar school, we're not talking about these things. I remember my favorite story about stuff coming up in the Bible was I was at Deb Chapin's classroom, our saintly second grade teacher, and I was doing an observation, and she was studying Sodom and Gomorrah. And one of the kids in class raised their hands and said, well, what sin were these people committing? And Deb said, it's good that Mr. Fisher is here. He will. And I'm like, on the observation form I wrote, that's not fair. But we're not jumping into all of these issues at young ages. We want kids to grow up in those young grammar school years and just have fun and enjoy the world the way that God's made it. That said, when we're thinking about secondary school, hiding out and pretending that there are no controversial ideas in the world, pretending that there is nothing outside the Shire is not a way to help prepare someone, and it's not a way to protect the Shire either.
If I could add something to that, Ty, I think there's a real danger, well-meaning, but a dangerous way to teach the great books. I'm going to use Marx as an example here.
Okay.
So let's just say we're reading through
this Groucho?
Well, it could be, but we're going to go with Carl.
Okay. Ding, ding, ding.
Right. So you're teaching the Communist Manifesto. You read the Communist Manifesto. You kind of hang it up there. You shoot all the holes in it, and then you move on. And then your students have the same response that student had.
Yes.
Right. Oh, well, my goodness. What kind of ridiculous, insane person would even embrace that? Well, here's the thing. Dr. Spanger, our principal, he has said something that really stuck to me, and I think that we should apply it more broadly. He says, if you can't understand why someone would embrace Marxism, then you're never going to be effective in talking to anybody who holds any worldview even close to it.
Yeah.
And I think that's important. So there's a certain, it's almost like we're not having a proper respect for the power of that worldview by just straw manning it, shooting holes in it, and then sending our students out into the world ill-prepared to really deal with it. And then they actually run into situations in third world countries, and they start seeing a very different world out there and realize, oh my goodness, now I can understand why millions of people would embrace Marxism.
Sure.
Now let's deal with it on that level.
Right. What are some of your favorite moments from some of the Strawbridge discussions that we've had?
We had the deconstructing your faith. We actually had
that one did get some of our students angry, didn't it?
That's-
So
Yes,
you need to back that a little bit.
So it was really interesting because the guy doing it actually is a believer, and he was, playing a role. Nobody knew he was playing a role, and he did it very effectively. I think maybe one or two kids might have, sussed it out, but anyway.
So effectively that when he laid all his cards on the table, there were some students that were,
Yeah, like, wait a minute, Santa Claus doesn't exist? So one of the things that was interesting about that experience is, and this is going to sound like a funny favorite moment, is watching them squirm. And because it was a unique scenario, this is one of our own who knows all of the answers. This is one of our own who's been trained and left, and he knows where to poke us. And, he had a little bit of a dismissive tone as well. And you could see the students struggling with maybe a little bit of, I don't want to say anger, but frustration. Mm-hmm. And what was great about that moment is there's an affective side to apologetics, which is, what am I going to do when I experience someone, a human being sitting across from me who's belittling my faith or giving a caricature, a straw man, or saying something I don't have an answer
doing
for.
exactly what Bruce said about Marx, right?
Right, exactly. And how are you going to carry yourself in that moment? And having to watch the students sort of, squirm and wrestle, and then watch them also carry themselves in spite of that with dignity. And then afterwards, when we talked through it, you could tell that there was a lot going on internally that didn't manifest itself externally. And I just thought, that's kind of why we're doing this, so that they have to look back on themselves and see, oh, this is how this made me feel. And here's how I almost reacted. And thankfully I didn't, but boy, did I want to, just that wrestling.
Well, and I think I chalk this up to the kind of cave that we live in because of our technology, where a lot of the opinions that we have expressed in our lives are ones that agree with us, right? So I've noticed that a lot of times young people are able to say snarky things. They're able to say harsh things, but very few of them can hear an argument, digest it, not react emotionally, and state why they disagree without becoming angry or emotionally engaged. So I think in some ways this is a gigantic advantage for students if we just give them the ability to listen, to think, and to keep from losing it. Mm-hmm. And then answer effectively, and answer in a way that shows the love of Christ in a deep way, not by beating down your opponent. I mean, Jesus is going to judge the world in the end. He doesn't need my help right now. but in a very deep way, affirming even though someone might deny the existence of God, that we're going to treat them as if they are what they really are, which is a being made in God's image.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that's hard is our students are inundated with TikTok culture. And so in this particular...
Bruce, you're the only one who I know has been on a TikTok video.
Well, if I've been on one, then I did not give consent.
Yeah. I was at a volleyball tournament this weekend, and I realized that there are these girls dancing in pairs all over the place, and I'm in the background of about 20 TikTok videos, I think.
Yeah, they're sneaky that way.
They are.
They are.
I started dancing. So
What else are you going to do?
Yeah.
But what you notice in a lot of these TikTok or shorts, YouTube shorts is, and I'm not speaking ill or not ill of any of these names like Charlie Kirk or Ben Shapiro or whatever, and they'll be giving a speech, and it's a 30-second clip where they have this zinger.
Gotcha.
Gotcha. And then the poor, freshman college student who's some kind of progressive lefty looks like a total fool.
Yeah.
And then you just watch another one. Yeah. And then you watch another one. And then of course
what conclusion do you reach at the end of it? All these college students are fools. Anyone that holds this idea is a fool.
And not only that, but that's what the dialogue looks like.
Yeah.
And then hopefully what we're modeling for them is, this is a longer, more substantive, meaty, personal relationship and conversation. It's not really about the gotchas and the zingers. We don't really want to bring them in to do that. But if I could just say, you're asking the highlights.
Yeah.
My highlight would be the way our students have embraced speakers in a loving and welcoming way. And you know what? When we first started doing this, I didn't really know what that was going to look like.
No.
Yeah.
Because of the culture, I wondered if the students were going to be sitting there with their zinger questions, but they haven't treated them that way.
Yeah.
And I think, first of all, that has to do with parenting. We got some really good parents here at Veritas Academy who are teaching their kids how to engage. And then we're just trying to model that.
Yeah. It might have something to do with our teachers as well.
I think it has a lot to do with our teachers.
Yeah.
I just wanted to give a shout out.
Okay.
We have some good parents.
Go parents.
I mean, So, yeah, from the very first one, which was a incredibly sensitive, difficult topic.
Oh, yeah.
They have treated our speakers very well.
So what are some other highlights for you all?
When the gentleman that Bruce was referring to who did our first Strawbridge series, his name was Michael Bright, and he was just called Bright. And he was, interestingly enough, presented himself as a Christian, but obviously believing things that we would, it's theologically conservative, we'd say way outside of what we would consider as core Orthodox Christian belief. So one of the things that was interesting is when the students were engaging him, he had some anecdotes about what kindness looks like. And we've all, heard this kind of argument that Christians are of two types. There are kind Christians who are more theologically progressive, and there are the unkind conservative ones. And what I thought was really interesting is how he had anecdotes, and he engaged them anecdotally. And anecdotes are important, but our students didn't take the bait. And what I mean by that is they recognize that kindness is important as a virtue, but it's not an argument. And I think this is one of the biggest challenges for our kids today is how do you deal with somebody's story? How can you be kind towards someone and listen to their story and be understanding, but then still have a critical appraisal of it?
Yeah.
And so I watched them wrestle through that and figure out, because somebody can use that you can weaponize your story.
Yes, you can.
You can say, this is my story. Are you going to tell me that my story is incorrect? So
how do you refute a narrative?
Yeah. And what's interesting is to have someone standing before you who's mixing those two things together. And I know in a moment we're going to talk about what do we do as parents. Just to have to watch our kids try to distinguish between the story part and the kindness that we have for someone in listening, understanding, so on and so forth, and then the truth part and not confusing those two things.
Yeah, I think going back to the Gil Smart moment back in the early days, before the Strawbridge series, he made a presentation, and then the students asked questions, and one student asked about gay marriage, and the student said, isn't this kind of like a slippery slope? Aren't like a lot of weird things going to start happening if we take this institution that's been the same for thousands and thousands of years and make this radical change? And Gil answered, he said, really, it's not a slippery slope. And even if it is, it's not a steep slope. It's like just a gradually descending one. And when Gil was moving out of town, I had lunch with him to kind of send him off. And he said, this was a number of years after Obergefell. He said, I think that student might have been on to something. And I was like, the student treated him well, and that ended up in a very small way, at least causing him to question some of the things. So that was one of my favorite moments. So, Graham, you had mentioned, as a parent, what can parents do to help build this kind of ability to listen maybe lovingly, but astutely to people? What can people do as parents, both positively and negatively?
I'll say something about the culture you create. I'm going to use the car as an example. Riding from place to place, I get to take my son to practices and, spend a lot of time in the car riding with him. What I've realized is that kids pick up on what your parent, what conversational engagement is, about politics, about theology, about, these kinds of issues. They pick up what are you modeling for them? And I think if we're honest, we can model cynicism,
yes,
or we can model snark. And if we're not careful, all they're hearing from us is that our culture, we're cynical about our culture, and we have snark towards those elements of our culture that are problematic. And it's funny how, I don't know if you guys root for the underdog in sports, but we Americans like to root for the
underdog. You're a Patriots fan.
Yeah, right. We're now the underdog, by the way. We are no longer the overdog. But it's funny how kids will start rooting for the opposite if you're not careful. Snark, two things can happen. Cynicism and snark can create a desire to understand the other side because they think, oh, you're just not fairly representing it. So it's almost like rooting for the underdog. Or snark or cynicism are battery acid in the soul. It creates guile. It makes you not sincere. And what I think some of our students are concerned about leaving Veritas Academy is, were we sincere? Were we joking about things that, you make the anecdote of something being idiotic. And so how do we model sincerity to our kids? And so I think just being aware as you're talking as parents to be careful that you're joyful, that you don't, it doesn't always seem like Y2K, the intellectual Y2K. Oh man, that's going way back to, I don't know.
Boy, cultivate listeners. We'll probably just have to put in the show notes links to what Y2K was. And if for those of you who are still using up toilet paper and ketchup that you purchased during the Y2K event, you might want to get rid of that ketchup now.
But there's a kind of like intellectual prepping that you're always preparing your kids for the apocalypse. And that's
intellectual preppering?
Yeah, prepping.
Oh my goodness,
You're a
Graham.
prepper.
We've got to start a company for this.
Yeah.
How to intellectually prep for the apocalypse.
He's coining new terms left and right.
But I think what it does is it creates in your kids a feeling that Christ hasn't won. He isn't victorious. The light hasn't gone into the world and the darkness can't comprehend it. The light shines in the darkness and the darkness hasn't overwhelmed it.
And it's driving it out.
Right. And you have to have a joyful home, and you have to be careful about cynicism and model this wonderful idea of, intellectual virtue. Understanding precedes judgment. Yes, we want to understand, and we also want to make judgments. And you can be too quick in judgment without articulating a position correctly, or you can only understand and not make judgments. But these are things we model to our kids, and they will take away from those conversations how they ought to carry themselves in relationship to our culture.
That's really good, Graham.
I want to go to Robert's Rules.
Oh, my.
And I want to make a motion that we do an entire podcast on modeling snark. That was a great one, Graham. Yeah, no, I would amen everything Graham said. On a more practical level, I would just say, when we have an event, ask your kids about it. Hey, I heard that you had this person that came in. What'd you think? What do your friends think of that? What do your friends that go to different schools think about that? And fill them out and hear them out. And at that point, I don't know. I'm not really normally one to give parenting advice. But, at that point, I wouldn't preach at them. I wouldn't inundate them with, well, you do know that this is what we believe. Okay, just hear them out.
Yeah.
How did they process that? And then store that away and look for opportunities to speak into their lives.
Well, and I'll just add, great stuff, guys, but I'll just add this too, because I always find that sometimes the parents it's not just a thing of what do you do, but when do you do it? So I think if your kids are, younger, and I mean in elementary or grammar school grades, I don't think sitting down and having these conversations with them is good or meaningful. You need to answer their questions when they come up, but Graham used the word catechism or catechizing, and I think there is a time when you just need to be focused on, here's what the Bible says, here what the right answers are, here's what we believe. So that happens when they're younger. It's when they're in those middle school and high school years when I think making sure that there are open lines of communication, because they're going to be running into things that they're beyond. Sometimes, we've had Walt Mueller from the Center for Youth Parent Understanding, and he'll bring up things, and I'll go like, well, that can't be real. It is. It is. So we need to make sure that we're not catechizing high school students, that we're catechizing younger students, and then really thinking about moving from catechism to something more like the wisdom literature when they're in, the wisdom literature, those great, I think it's in Proverbs 16 where it says, back to back. Answer a fool according to his folly, and don't answer a fool according to his folly. And the Bible's the writer there is making the point. Sometimes you just gotta be wise enough to know when it's right to answer a fool and when it's not. So you need to help them at that point by having discussions, by letting them speak their mind, and then it's always fair to ask questions. I think that you need to make sure, though, they're not questions. You're not going back into that gotcha. You're not trying to, and I was trying to think of a nice way to say this, but it's kind of like intellectual pornography. It's like that moment. It's the gotcha moment, right? That's what life is going to be like. Well, it's not what life is like. In fact, the best discussions are those ones that go on over time, and they're ones where you get done with the discussion, and even if you disagree with someone, you've won. Graham, you said this better than I've been saying it here, but there are some people that are always dialoguing and never coming to a conclusion. always talking and never coming to knowledge of the truth. That's not what we want. But there have been times when I've had discussions with people. We end the discussion and we still disagree, but we've become closer as friends. And there might be things that keep us from becoming very, very close friends, but we've become closer. Boy, that's a lot better than the gotcha moment. That's a lot better.
And it's interesting. That's how we try to teach. I mean, you can lecture, you can say, here are all the answers. But I had a professor who once said there are no good answers to unasked questions. He didn't mean that there's something wrong with the answer. He's talking about the way God created our intellect, that when you have a question, you're anticipating the answer. The question actually turns out to be the precondition for understanding the answer. So in mathematics, the reason why you show your work is it tells the teacher, oh, the student is asking the right questions. And they got the wrong answer, but the questions seem to be the right questions, and I can show them how to get the right answer. If you just look in the back of the book and get the answer, what's unfortunate about that is the process that's necessary to recapitulate in order for the answer to be meaningful is cut out. And so that's your point about catechizing, Ty. When they're younger, we're giving them answers, and that's good. We're building that foundation. But as they get older, they're going to have questions, and if we're afraid of that's what the gotcha is. It's I'm terrified of the questions. I'm going to make reality look like a series of gotcha incidents in which every conversation is curated to get to the gotcha answer, and that's just a false picture of what engaging people with whom you disagree, what it's going to look like. It's not going to look like that. It's rarely going to look like that.
Well, that is so terrifyingly, that is actually how we choose presidents now.
Right. That is
Is
correct.
who can have the biggest gotcha moments.
Yeah.
But the flip side of that, if we think that what we have to do is get to the gotcha moment, underneath it, what we're really subtly conveying is we're not really sure if Jesus is Lord.
That's right.
We're not really sure if Jesus is Lord. Because if he is Lord, there's not anything to be scared of out there. So there was one other important question that I wanted to look into. And let's have Graham, if you could take this one. What would you say to parents who might say, but wait, if we expose them to this, what if we're not inoculating them? What if we're infecting them? What if they believe these things? What would you say?
Yeah, there are three really important factors to consider. One is age. So we've been very careful for this to be 11th and 12th graders. 10th graders, we're not doing the same thing. It's kind of preparing them. But 11th and 12th graders, the reason why we've chosen 11th and 12th graders is we know that very shortly they're going to go off to college, but they also have jobs. Most of our kids work in the summer, and, I know parents are curating an environment in which they're surrounded by Christians, but we also know that you just can't do that forever. You can't, as a parent, continually control the environment of your children. So it is scary. And so the first thing to acknowledge is we're doing it with 11th and 12th graders because we know that environment is going to be organically, naturally sort of imposed on them just by life.
It's coming.
Yep. The second part of this is that the fear comes from a very legitimate place because we've seen so many stories of kids who've walked away from the faith, and they've walked away because they've heard someone consistently presenting a case for something more attractive than Christianity.
Yep.
And the third thing, and I want the third to kind of piggyback on the second, is I think often those things, what's attractive, are if we're right about this, if we're following a biblical model, the thing that's attractive about our culture is based on sin. And I think our parents think that the problem is primarily intellectual and not actually the affections and, of course, our tendency, even for converted Christian people, to stray, the tendency of our heart to wander and to stray. And so I would say the third part of this is parents at some point have to give their children to God.
Yep.
And they have to say, I'm going to trust you, Lord, that as my child walks out from high school into college or career and develops friendships and chooses to go to this place or to that place, to hang out with these friends or those friends, read these books or those books, watch these shows or those shows, that God will continue to grow and mature that child. It's really hard to do. It's, what Abraham had to do with Isaac, in God asking him, are you going to basically tithe your son to me? I'm going to tithe my son to you ultimately, theologically, but Abraham, are you willing to give your son to me? So there is a giving your child to God that it's appropriate for 11th, 12th graders, college kids. Parents have to do that.
Yeah, and we talk a lot about treating others the way that we would want to be treated, and I just would say to parents who are struggling with that very real temptation, would you want your parents to have treated you that way? And if they did, were you happy when your parents treated you that way? And we're in Lancaster County, and if you would want to run away from culture, we're the best at it.
Yeah.
Right? Lancastrians are.
Yeah.
But let me just tell you that it was eye-opening to me when I moved to Lancaster County that most Amish people had better iPhones than I did. And if they have that, you should not pretend that a culture is not going to leak in. So I'm not against you moving off the grid or moving away, but I think that God looks on the intentions of the heart. And the intentions of the heart are these, that we are trying to prepare these students to stand for Christ in these challenging times. I wish that I had control of everything and everyone, and then really, I'm so glad I don't.
Yeah.
I'd screw it up so bad. But for those parents, I think that just saying, are we going to prepare or are we going to run away? Those are two strategies. And what we're saying here at Veritas is, because we believe in the lordship of Christ, because we believe that Christ is king now, we're not going to run away.
Yeah.
We're not going to run away. We're going to prepare as best we can.
I think another interesting way to think about this is, why on earth did God allow David in the Psalms to express extreme disappointment?
Yep. It's good.
Why are you governing the world this way, Lord? Why?
How long?
Yeah, how long, oh Lord? And so we see in the Psalms David modeling wrestling with God. That's a very mature skill. For our kids who wrestle with God, I suspect that wrestling is going to produce incredible fruit. So parents shifting to the stage of, it's okay to wrestle with difficult questions, but make sure you're wrestling with God. And doing that with them, us wrestling with them, us modeling for them. I think a great example is suffering. It might not be an abstract intellectual question that's going to make some of our kids walk away from the faith. It might be not having had, how do you suffer? How do you deal with the question of, where is God? God seems absent. God doesn't seem here. I'm experiencing this suffering. And for parents to enter into that space with their kids, dealing with suffering in a parental way that is like our Heavenly Father deals with us, that's what we see in the Psalms. That's why people love the Psalms. We see David wrestling, and then we also see David coming out the other side with hope, because God as a father has given consolation. So there's a deep, what we might call practical pastoral component in helping your children through those years. It's very different than, just giving them, as you said, catechizing with answers. Now it's showing them, how do you wrestle?
Yeah. So thank you all for coming in and talking about the Strawbridge Discussion Series. And, just to bring it full circle back around to Gregg, I've been in the Reformed and Presbyterian world for many, many years now. And oftentimes, it's not very often that the word irenic is attached to a Reformed or Presbyterian minister.
Ironic, maybe.
Ironic, snarky, in search of the gotcha moment.
Yeah.
But Gregg truly was ironic, and I think that it's a tribute to him to have the intentions of this series dedicated to his memory. So thank you all.
Yeah, amen.
You've been listening to Cultivate, the podcast of Veritas Academy, a preschool through 12th grade classical Christian school in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. If you'd like to learn more about Veritas, visit veritasacademy.com to discover the truth, beauty, and goodness of classical Christian education.